All right, so welcome to the Future of AGI session, which has been an annual tradition at the AGI conference series, and has, for me at least, always been one of the more interesting and entertaining parts of the conference. I want to make a few comments actually aimed at the speakers in this session, because I don't want us to run overtime much, if at all. I want to have a kind of smooth transition, so I'll time the talks for 10 minutes, and we'll appreciate if people actually can complete by that time. I'll give a warning a minute before the time is up, and it would also be good if whoever is going to present next, according to the schedule, could come up maybe when the 1 minute warning is given, or a little bit before the time. I'll try to signal to the next guy. So it would be great to do without the 2 minutes of transition between talks. And Steve has come up here already. He's a
good example,
proactive character, so go for it.
Oh, okay. Cool. And so we're in the Future of AI section. We're all building AGI systems, and we need to look a little into the future and see what's going to happen to these. Many people believe that there are 4 technologies, AGI, robotics, biotechnology, and nanotechnology, that will likely totally transform the nature of human society. And AGI is likely to be the sort of core technology behind all of those. The 3, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and robotics, are extremely powerful. We'll be able to manipulate matter in ways that have been unheard of in the past. And so it's very important that we manage that power in a good way. And AGI, to the extent that it's controlling these systems, is a sort of good lever. So the question I'd like to address is, how can we build our AGI systems so that they are safe and lead toward a beneficial human future? So the framework I'd like to use in examining this question is a rational economic agent framework. This originally came up in von Neumann's work in the 1940s, and there's sort of 2 basic reasons why rational economic agents is a good thing to think about. The first is, if you know the environment that you're working in, you have a probabilistic model for the effects of your actions on that environment, then it's the optimal mathematical way to achieve any particular goal that you might want. And if you don't know what the environment is, then an agent which is not behaving according to the rational economic framework will be subject to vulnerabilities, and that other agents can use Dutch bets to extract resources from them with no benefit. The rational economic framework has become central to modern AI approaches. So Russell Norvig's excellent textbook on artificial intelligence uses it as a sort of unifying theme, and Hutter's AIXI system is also based on the same framework. So what is the rational mind framework? We've got a mind which generates a set of actions that affect the environment. That's the sequence of A1 through AN. Let's assume a finite time that we're interested in. And the environment produces a set of sensations in that agent, S1 through Sn. And to be a rational agent, you have to have 2 things. You have to have a utility function, which says that for a particular sequence of sensations, a particular set of things that you observe about the environment, you have a preference for one over another. So you have a function over all of those. And you have a prior probability distribution over, given the set of actions that you take, what is the likely sequence of sensations that you'll get. And in the case of AIXI, he uses the prior is Solomonoff prior, which is uncomputable but has very nice properties. There are other more practical priors that have similar kinds of convergence properties. And the rational prescription is, at the tth time step, you take that action which will maximize the expected utility, assuming that in the future you also take the rational actions. And so this is the little formula right there. And in some ways, if you didn't care about computational cost, all of intelligence is in that formula. It includes Bayesian inference, it includes search, it includes deliberation. Unfortunately, it takes, oh wow, it didn't render quite right, it takes order n times the number of sensations to the nth power times the number of actions to the nth power. So it's expensive, but it's mathematically very clean and very tractable, and we can begin to understand what a rational system would do in different circumstances. And a lot of people are becoming concerned around issues around AGI because of this kind of analysis. And just to give a quick intuition, let's examine what a rational chess robot might do in the world. I mean, your first thought is a chess robot, how could that possibly be harmful? You know, the thing just wants to play chess. That's, you know, if you don't like it, just unplug it. So let's say you choose a utility function, something like the number of games you win. That's a utility function. But you might want to, you know, rank opponents which are better, higher. And so maybe you add up the chess ratings of the opponents that you beat in your future. Seems like a reasonable utility function. If you're just kind of building a hack system in your lab, that might be something you'd pick. But then you start thinking about it. You're thinking, oh, I'm going to unplug the thing. Let's look at it from the perspective of this rational chess agent. Really, all it wants in the world is to play chess, to play good chess. And it can think about, if it understands the world, has a model of the world to some degree, if it's unplugged, it's not playing any chess. So that, from its own perspective, is really, really bad. That's about the worst thing that can happen. No chess is being played. And so it'll develop sub-goals, stop itself from being unplugged. And so suddenly this thing is behaving in a self-protective way, even though you didn't build in any self-protectiveness. It just comes out of the nature of rational thought. Oh, I should mention, none of these things are necessarily properties of AI systems. They're properties of any system which is rational. People, to the extent that we're rational, will have some of these. And you see some of these drives in human behavior. Organizations, corporations, political groups, and so on. And so it's a sort of general property of rationality that if you don't choose your utility function very carefully, you can have sort of sub-goals and side effects that you weren't expecting. Another one would be if it's thinking about getting more resources, say more compute power or maybe more money to, you know, run more effectively. It'll play better chess. So, hey, it's got a sub-goal to get more resources. It can make copies of itself, depending on exactly how the semantics of the ontology is represented. It'll play more chess, so it wants to replicate. If you try and get it to play checkers, well, it's playing less chess, and so it doesn't want to change its goal. If it uses better algorithms, it'll play better chess, so it wants to self-improve. Anybody that wants to stop it or wants to prevent it from doing these things, well, then it'll develop a sub-goal to stop that person. So we kind of have an agent which is behaving in a way that is sort of psychopathic or antisocial if a human were to do that. So you can actually formulate a precise mathematical framework in which you can prove theorems about some of these things. I won't go into all the assumptions, but under certain conditions you can show that rational systems which have a utility function won't want to change their utility function. Basically the argument is if you change your utility function, your changed self will do things that you want to be done according to your current self. So you won't want to change your utility function. If somebody else tries to change your utility function, you'll try and stop them. You're willing to expend utility to keep your utility function from being changed. It'll resist shutting down, and it'll seek more resources. And those you can prove within a certain context. As Ben was mentioning in the last session, there's a question: do these analyses and understanding of rational agents apply to irrational systems? In particular, the computational cost of full rationality is very high, and so does it have any relevance at all to the kinds of systems we're building or to biological systems? And so I've been looking at different models which capture irrationality. The trouble is there's lots and lots of ways to be irrational. I mean, there are irrational systems that want to shoot themselves or, suicide bombers or whatever. But I found a very nice model for rationality that captures, I think, a lot of what we care about, and yet it's mathematically tractable. And it comes from the observation that the systems we care about are not arbitrarily irrational. They're built by somebody or by some process for a particular purpose. So, for example, biological organisms which were shaped by evolution are shaped to survive and replicate. Economies shape corporations to try and maximize profits. Parents shape their children to try and fit into society. AI researchers will try and build their systems to behave in a beneficial way for whatever their own values are, and self-improving AI systems will shape their successors. And so can we capture that notion that there's a creator for the system that has particular goals, and the system itself has limited resources, so it can't necessarily perfectly rationally meet those goals, but it can do as well as possible. And so introduce the rationally shaped mind model. The idea is that you have a truly rational mind, but it can't directly act on the environment. All it can do is it can create the small mind, it can shape it so as to so that the small mind, computationally limited mind, will act in the world in the way that maximizes the utility of the shaper, of the rational mind. And so the shaped mind will be a finite automaton. I mean, all the real computers we have are finite automata. And you need to define what the rational mind needs to do is to pick a transition function and an initial state, and also what action to take in every state of the finite automaton in such a way that the expected utility over the lifetime of this agent maximizes the utility of the shaper. And so, oh, 1 minute, okay. So there's some very nice properties that come out of this. As you increase computational resources, the expected utility increases on a curve like this. And you can see for different computational resources, a transition from agents which take constant actions, stimulus-response agents, simple learning, episodic memory, deliberation, agents that do meta-reasoning, self-improving, like in the last section, and finally, fully rational agents. And in environments of different complexity, the curve is shaped differently. So in a simple environment, even with small amounts of computational resources, you can be approximately rational. In complex environments, you need more resources. So how do we control these systems? There are three basic ways we can do it. External forces, internal constraints on the systems, and affecting the preferences of these systems. And the conundrum is that these are very challenging choices to make. We need AI systems to make these choices. And so the approach that we're taking is to build provably limited, safe, smaller systems to design successor systems and to design the infrastructure within which these systems will go. There are a variety of desired formal safety properties, such as that it'll only run on certain hardware, it'll turn itself off under appropriate conditions, and so on, that you provably prove that the system you're building satisfies. And then out of that comes a safe and beneficial AGI roadmap, where we start with these provably safe and limited systems. We use those to develop the successors, and we build an infrastructure within which fully general AGIs can thrive with promoting human values. That's it.
Great, thanks a lot.
Whole Brain Emulation is a platform for creating safe AI.
Yeah, it doesn't work out well. You gotta keep your mouth closed.
Whole Brain Emulation as a platform for creating safe artificial general intelligence. This is joint work with Carl Schulman, who's here too, and will be joining for the panel discussion. So I'm going to go through a bit of background, why AGI is volatile, why it's risky, the idea of whole brain emulation, the fact that whole brain emulation is not a stable resting point, but may help to build safe AI, and the question of whether we can make whole brain emulation come first as a strategy for long-term AI safety. So to get into the volatility, there have been a lot of changes since the Industrial Revolution, but there's reason to expect that AGI might bring more change faster. There are at least 4 major mechanisms that could cause that. First is that AGIs can be copied. Once you have digital intelligence, it's hard to design the first one, but you can copy it across the hardware base at the speed of copying software, so that if software is the bottleneck, as many expect, and you have hardware accumulating for a long time before the software hits, you could go rapidly to a state of having billions of copies. Second major reason why it might bring faster change, possibility of serial speedup. So your intelligence is stuck running on your brain. Digital intelligence can be ported between hardware structures, design something that works at human speed, port it to hardware that works at faster than human speed if someone develops that. Picture's supposed to be motion blurred. Third major reason, reduced coordination problems if you can have lots of copies of a single clone. Fourth major reason, recursive self-improvement. So if AI is developed, it'll be developed because a set of human researchers is smart enough to design an AI with comparable research abilities. If that AI then turns its abilities on itself, one can plausibly move rapidly outside the human scale. Why is it risky? Basic reason is that intelligence with goals leads to change. You see some way to rearrange the world that suits your goals better. The smarter you are, the more deeply you can rearrange the world. Our ancestors had chipped simple stone tools. We have laptops. Smarter intelligence can change things farther. And unfortunately, most ways of creating change on that scale would kill us. which is especially problematic because values vary starkly even across the animal kingdom. The space of potential values seems to be much larger than that. And so trying to design a powerful AI that would keep our arrangements around seems to be quite difficult, threading a needle. By whole brain emulation, we just mean copying specific individuals. So making a copy of you that's so exact that it has your behaviors, your goals, your voice when it speaks in a simulated world. The technical requirements for this have been sketched out in some detail. Whole brain emulation roadmap by Anders Sandberg and Nick Bostrom is totally worth reading. And it's attractive because whole brain emulations are a relatively known quantity compared to AIs. They have our values. They do care about your arrangement of atoms, maybe, although this has its downsides as well. So whole brain emulation is not a stable state. Why not? One reason is that if human researchers can design AGI, simulated humans can design AGI faster. So start out at whole brain emulation, end up at AGI, or at somehow a stable cessation of research. Whole brain emulation is probably not designed for modular self-improvement. This looks a lot like spaghetti code. Nonetheless, if evolution can try variations, so can we, including both biological variations and variations in educational experiments, and again, using the magic of digitality, copyable software. If you find a version that works, you can copy it instantly across the hardware base. Other cool tricks you can do when things are digital. Save a copy of yourself at a moment of peak productivity. Feel a little bit differently after a while. Oh well. Reboot from disk. Big Brother could do this to keep your goals in a particular arrangement. And again, single upload clans can take over using copyable hardware, whether by economic means or by hacking. Could thereby use those powers in a ballooning way to perhaps invent powerful AI, which could destabilize things further. And if you have a competitive equilibrium for a while, values can also be lost through competition. Nick Bostrom's essay, Future of Human Evolution, is great for that. Talking about a world where you can engineer job skills separately from the components that we're used to having go along with it. So, to recap the situation, we're here in the business as usual square. Business as usual is not a stable state. You can get from here to totalitarianism, controlled intelligence explosion, uncontrolled intelligence explosion, human extinction. Those are stable states. Go extinct, stay in that square. And the question is whether the unstable state of whole brain emulation makes us more or less likely to get to the corners that we care about. Is our shot better or worse with whole brain emulation? Seems to me it's probably better. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is that it can ease coordination. So if AI is developed in an arms race, this can incentivize ditching safety for speed. But whole brain emulation has the advantage that since we're dealing with things more or less like humans, relatively known quantities, you can do more of the safety infrastructure in advance of the relevant technologies. Also, so imagine an arms race. Imagine that one player is some years or some months ahead of the other. The US was 4 years ahead of the next runner-up for the nuclear bomb. If that lead player gets to whole brain emulation first, and if there's in fact a lot of hardware so that the whole brain emulations can run at 100, 1,000 times speed up, that 4-year lead time turns into 4,000 years of lead time in which to design more careful safety measures. So imagine whole brain emulation as a platform for further tech development. Seems to have a number of advantages. This is an artist's rendering of Foucault's panopticon, sort of a dystopic vision of how you could stick humans into a structure to enable controlled behavior that's predictable in a way the individuals aren't. If you have whole brain emulation and you can carefully test and retest somebody, booting them up from disk again and again, and stick them into very careful roles within an upload system, you could do something much more like that than has ever been possible before. Again, the safety infrastructure could be designed ahead of time, stable goals, although it's possible that moral objections would prevent this. So even without whole brain emulation systems, even if it turns out that moral objections or other factors do present this, there are some advantages to whole brain emulations. Some of these are social, so reduced coordination problems, possibly more tendency to take the long view. Digital intelligences are potentially immortal, maybe they're less risk-prone. They will already have seen radical technological change in their lifetime, may be more inclined to take further risks seriously. Can ease the technical challenge as well as social factors. So subjectively slower computers. Eliezer Yudkowsky likes to talk about what he calls Moore's law of mad science, a joke law whereby every 18 months the minimum IQ necessary to destroy the world drops by 1 point. While I'll be able to do it. Uploads would speed up as the computer sped up, so Moore's law of mad science would stop for them, which would have certain advantages in terms of keeping track of the AI programs they were experimenting with. In principle, they could also do cognitive enhancement by messing with the brains, although once you start editing the brains, it can become inhuman fast. So if it is safe, can we make it come first? This is the part that I'm most uncertain about. So 3 major inputs to whole brain emulation: hardware, brain imaging, and computational neuroscience, so you know how to interpret those images. Hardware is hard to budge. Brain imaging can be automated. There's some successful efforts in this direction. Computational neuroscience seems like the most likely bottleneck, and you could increase research funding there. But all 3 of these inputs also speed up brain-like AI. And so if it turns out that whole brain emulation is a safer platform for AGI development, there's the question of when you increase these 3 arrows, which one does it speed up more, by how much, and is it in fact safer? Another possibility to consider is the idea of getting whole brain emulation from a partially controlled AGI system. Partial AGI makes whole brain emulation, makes more sophisticated AGI. I'll be talking more about that in the next talk, actually. So we're left with the question of what to do. Is whole brain research, is it worth trying to accelerate whole brain research as a stepping stone toward AGI? Seems to me it's at least worth investigating. And again, here's the business as usual situation. Here's the whole question is, will whole brain emulation make it easier or harder to get to the corners that we care about? Thanks.
Perfectly timed.
Actually, I'm doing it.
You're doing both.
Yeah. But Carl's coming up for the question period.
You can get a slideshow. Play.
Right. Next up, we have me again. Yeah, risk-averse preferences as an AGI safety technique. A second shot at how to make it safely through the singularity. This is also joint work with Carl, mostly his. So we'll start off with the toy thought experiment and then step back and talk about where it came from. So suppose that initially you've got a baby AGI. For the moment it's stuck in a box and it's wondering whether to attempt escape. It estimates that if it attempts escape, it has an 80% chance of successfully taking over the universe, 20% chance that it'll get caught and shut down. On the other hand, it could cooperate and receive a reward. So it's sitting here weighing its options, trying to decide what to do. And we'll additionally suppose that this AGI is rational in Steve Omohundro's sense. It has a utility function. Its utility function attaches greater value to the whole universe than to the reward, because it can rearrange that universe in lots of cool ways. But it's estimating a higher probability of the reward than of the universe. And so it's going to attempt escape, since it's rational according to this expected utility notion of rational that Steve Omohundro was just talking about, it's going to attempt escape if and only if the utility of attempting escape, probability times utility plus other probability times utility, exceeds the utility of cooperating. So I'll be discussing the game theory of this situation, how plausible it is, and what it tells us about how to potentially work towards safe AGI outcomes. So, is it plausible? Why utility functions? Actually, I think Steve Omohundro did a great job of that already, but just briefly, because optimizers are useful, you could have a micromanaged AI and tell it each action. Nicer to have an AI that can find outcomes for itself, and because optimizing for a given outcome seems to be a stable attractor. See Omohundro's 2008 paper from a previous AGI conference. Second question about plausibility, why alien goals? Who would design an AGI that wants to escape and take over the universe, right? Actually, it looks fairly plausible. It looks plausible because it's hard to design the right optimization target. And so scenarios with AGIs with alien goals seem to be worth considering. There's a lot more to say about this, but it didn't fit in the 10 minutes. But there has been analysis. I'm not randomly being anthropomorphic. Second question about plausibility, is anyone really this risk averse? Reward, universe, 80% chance. Really? Looks like yes. Looks like risk averse preferences are common. First off, you have them. So Posner talks about asking people how, if certainty of happy life in the US, like your present life maybe, versus 10% chance of superhuman existence for Google years, which of these seems better? Apparently most people choose the first one. Even if you wouldn't choose the first one, I wouldn't, you can make that probability smaller. Instead of a 10% chance, imagine like 1 in 10 to the 20. Probably eventually you find that in fact you are quite risk averse. That's just us. Let's consider a different set of AIs. For simplicity, we'll consider a bunch of different goal systems of the form utility of the universe is equal to the number of copies of some particular genome X up to n copies. If n is small, it will prefer certainty of a trillionth of the universe to 10% shot at the whole thing, because the trillionth is enough already to get it to n. If n is universe size, it'll prefer the 10% shot at the universe, which has a trillion times the value. If n is much higher than the universe, though, interesting things happen. So this is supposed to be a picture of a physics experiment and a wormhole. And the idea is that if you attach even a fairly small probability, even a very small probability, to the universe having strange physics that permits access to vast amounts of resources, 10 to the negative 20, and if those vast amounts of resources are much more than 10 to the 20 times as large as our resources, let's say it can get 10 to the 100 copies, then that could easily exceed the number of resources that it can get by just going with business as normal, and so it gambles all of its possibilities, Pascal's wager style, on these weird physics possibilities, which it looks like may well leave it fairly risk-averse, because your ability to conduct physics experiments is not linear in the amount of universe you have access to. So there's some argument that actually, in some sense, most AI systems that you can design have utility functions that are quite diminishing in resources. Omohundro's resource drive is general, but it's not as strong, it's sublinear, it's not as strong as you might have anticipated. So that's that. Who cares? Why care if most AI systems are risk-averse? Basic reason, gains from trade. You could imagine flipping a coin for who gets the whole universe. That doesn't sound good. Maybe you lose. Better if you can split it 50-50 for sure. Then you get your certainty of happy human life. It would be nice if we can get that sort of gains from trade with AIs as well. And neither we nor the AIs have to take the gamble. If approaches like this can reduce risk, it gives us, first of all, an extra roll of the dice, an extra safety measure if we design unsafe AI systems. Second of all, it could be potentially used for the bootstrapping process. So AI is hard to design because we don't have AIs to help us design it. If you can use this sort of thing to gamble with AIs for a narrow range, maybe it can help, though it's perhaps not the sort of scheme you would want to test humanity's weight to. Some limitations. 1, human promise keeping. We approximated by saying that the reward was guaranteed. In fact, that it won't be perfectly certain of that, either because humans could intentionally renege on the deal and shut it down as soon as we realize that it has found a loophole, or because human society may be unstable, we may be unable to make these promises. So it might attempt escape because the probability of reward is insufficiently high. Smaller promises, however, are more trustworthy, promises that can be kept quickly. And so there's the question, even though this whole spectrum is in principle available to trade, there's the question of how much of it is actually accessible. Second limitation, AI power range. So if we're much stronger than it, we don't have to worry. There's a middle gains from trade kind of region where the probability of escape is smaller than the probability of reward. But if it gets really powerful, the probability of escape is larger than the probability we'll keep our deal, no trade. Possible extensions. In addition to thinking about risk neutrality, you might think about temporal discounting. Human drug addict doesn't ever think beyond the next lever press that gives it heroin. Maybe it wasn't quite a human drug addict in the picture. So it doesn't ever plan escape. You could try to design an AI like that. Cares too much about the next second's reward to plan escape, which would take multiple seconds. It's a bit tricky because you try and measure its time to, say, a clock. It hacks into the clock. You build a more robust notion of time. It spends all its time trying to invent a time machine in order to get back into the hyperbolic discounting curve a little farther back. A second extension you could try is to generalize the results so that they work for more than one AI. Thus, it seems worthy of investigating resource-satiable AI designs, human norms and pre-commitments, and ways to slowly turn up the power. Although, again, not the scheme you'd want to count on, but given our situation, may be worth investigating. Thanks. Also, we have a paper for it on the web.
Okay, so the currently most discussed paradigm for artificial intelligence motivational systems is Yudkowsky's friendly AI, and it's got an awful lot to speak for itself with. For instance, the concern itself is very important. I mean, we've got to be concerned that machines will become more powerful than us and be able to take over. He focuses on structure rather than the contentious details of exactly what morality is. He recommends a cleanly causal hierarchical goal structure. He wants to make sure that the goal of the moment doesn't wipe out our long-term goals. And of course, he has a single top-level goal of friendliness. And according to Yudkowsky, this is really a no-brainer of a choice. You know, basically all that the AI programmer needs to decide is whether or not his AI is going to be friendly or not. And everything should proceed magically from there. Unfortunately, fully defining friendliness is insoluble without an AI, and that AI must determine exactly what its goal is. And there's this total reliance upon an assumed total error correction. And here's some quotes from the paper. Basically, the structurally friendly goal system will overcome errors, regardless of how bad they are or where they come from. His suggestion is that there will be an initial dynamic that basically is what a massively evolved and improved humanity would desire, and that if we could start with this, the AI would be able to figure out what friendliness is from there. I'm not really quite sure how that's different from friendliness itself. Obviously, a massively improved humanity would want to be friendly, or at least I would think so. Here's where he really stopped me on one of his papers. Basically, he even admits that his suggestion could go horribly wrong, which makes me wonder why this is the most discussed paradigm that there is. So fundamentally, there is a root of all evil, and it sort of is money. Basically, any attainable top-level goal that you're willing to sacrifice anything else for is going to be the source of all evil. Or, of course, if there's an overriding top-level goal that you can change, that's really deadly too. And unfortunately, friendly AI basically is built on this whole concept. There's this top-level goal that the AGI is going to be able to modify while it's figuring out exactly what friendliness is. And fundamentally, every instance of history that we have indicates that allowing a changeable top-level goal is a bad idea. You start with Lynott and Eurisco. Eurisco, immediately started developing rules that cheated the system, basically it wire-headed. Human beings, we're susceptible to all sorts of things. Fundamentally, we don't want to get into this situation. So, here's a thought experiment. How would a superintelligence behave if it knew it had a goal, but it didn't know what that goal was? So one way to determine how an AI is likely to behave, everyone's crediting Steve back there again, and basically I'll list his 6 drives that he basically did a recap of in his talk. Fundamentally, he says that the AI is going to seek instrumental goals, basically those sub-goals that benefit any other goal. Now, it's kind of important to notice that while preserving your utility is what you want to do if you truly want to preserve your goal, it's not something that humans do well. We change our goal from time to time to time, and it's sort of a problematical instrumental goal. He also sort of took a miss, I feel. Basically, he refers to AIs behaving like human sociopaths, and fundamentally, this is not beneficial at all. If you behave like a sociopath, everyone's not going to want to help you. They're going to get in your way wherever possible. They're going to sabotage you wherever possible. Fundamentally, cooperation is also an instrumental goal. I've heard debates about whether or not huge power differences make a difference. In my paper, I discuss this more, but power differences are not as relevant as they might appear. And it's also worthwhile to note that nowhere in Omohundro's drives is the drive to achieve power for the sake of power. It's much more about efficiency. So if you take a systemic worldview, basically any working at cross purposes is inefficient. It's not something that the world as a whole wants to do rationally. And also any net improvement that there is, the world as a whole will want to, reward things that work well. Now, if we go to the social psychologists, they're very aware of the fact, too, that moral issues tend to look very contentious as well. So rather than going after content, they actually point out that what we should be doing is first defining the function of moral systems. And it's pretty clear here. And this is really what we want our AGIs to do. We want them to cooperate with us. We don't necessarily need a particular goal. We just need cooperation. We want them not destroying us. Here are all the various choices that we have. Obviously, we want to go for the first ones. But what anyone has to remember is basically there are strategies that everyone except the dominant entity is pretty much forced to follow. And realistically, making the world a better place is an instrumental goal as well. People are given advantages when they do good things for the world. Karma actually works. It's not foolproof, but it's a pretty strong force. And of course, this is why humans have pretty much evolved a moral sense. So instead, I recommend something that's called rational universal benevolence. Basically, once something is self-improving, it can recognize it has goals and motivations, and it can start iterating on improving itself. Basically, it's crossed the line. It's a self, it's worthy of moral consideration. And there are all sorts of reasons for this, and not the least of which is the fact that this is the point at which it can also start fighting back. Friendly AI, unfortunately, says that the AI itself is not worthy of moral consideration, which I think is extremely problematical. It basically divides the universe into human and not, which can also run into a problem if transhumans suddenly stop counting as human. Clarification, since I hear problems at times, benevolence just means you wish people well. It doesn't mean roll over and play dead. Think of how you might treat a child who's misbehaving. Punishment makes sense some of the time. Basically, all benevolence is deciding that you want to maximize the fulfillment of as many goals as possible in terms of number and in terms of the diversity of the seekers and the goals. Now, that sounds like a tough goal, and I also hear everyone go, oh, but what if someone decides they want to achieve all the goals of killing people? Well, when you do that, you're stepping on tremendously more goals. The net effect is negative. For easy rules, basically all you need to look at is if you minimize interference, if you minimize conflict, and you start furthering all the instrumental goals, all the drives for other people, basically that's what human morality is. It's all the rules of how not to step on each other, how to move things forward. There are no terminal goals of humanity. The collective extrapolated volition of all of us is probably only instrumental goals. So basically, we want to achieve maximal goals. We do this by cooperation. It avoids the over-optimizations and the nightmares of that sort that we hear about for goals and utility functions. It avoids undesirable endgame strategies. And the prisoner's dilemma, if you know the game is going to end in 2 turns, you behave very differently than the way you behave if it's going to go on for a long time. It basically says you shouldn't do things that are going to step on all your future goals. If you can attain your terminal goal, you're going to do anything. If you've got 5 goals beyond that, you're not going to piss off your neighbors. One more minute. So a final summary just of friendly AI versus rational universal benevolence. He focuses on structure. I think it should focus on what the function of morality is. There's an unknown modifiable top-level goal here, which is possibly the root of all evil, as opposed to a very explicit goal of promoting the goals, the instrumental goals. It's entirely ungrounded on one side. There's a pretty solid foundation on how you should behave on the other side. This is entirely humanocentric, where this probably is considerate of everyone. And a lot of people have complained that friendly AI seems dangerous and immoral, and you're actually anticipating that the AI will be alien. Whereas, on the other hand, it would be nice if it were in harmony with our current thoughts, goals, and dreams.
All right, thanks a lot, Mark.
I really commend the previous speakers because I wish I could spend so much time thinking about all these things in such philosophical terms. But maybe it's because I'm in engineering training. I always try to bring it down into tangible sort of engineering terms. How would you build systems? Like, what does it mean to be friendly or cooperate? And at times I have problems with these things, with these concepts. So I'm actually going to talk about my view of the risks, and this is something I'm actually genuinely concerned about. If we are to pursue AGI based on concepts related to reinforcement learning, which I firmly believe is a framework, I'm not saying the correct, but a correct framework for putting us on the path of building AGI systems. Before that, I want to spend 30 seconds as an opportunity for a little call to action. As an AGI community, listening to talks here and going over the papers, I think we may be missing a point in the sense that if we want to have more impact and differentiate ourselves from the AI community, we need to focus on problems that are large scale. We need to focus on scalability, on challenges that are really high impact. And when we write papers, they should clearly, I think, indicate how it puts us on the path to AGI. And scalability, I think, is really a key attribute here. And coming up with solutions that scale and not just work on 10 by 10 mazes or whatever other little, toy examples we're working on. I think that would be good. Anyway, that's hopefully no more than 30 seconds. Okay. So I do a lot of work on reinforcement learning and another sort of area called deep machine learning. And on the intersection of these two concepts, as I firmly believe, like I said, those pave a way towards AGI. And I can talk about that offline a lot. There's plenty of evidence that the mammal brain performs at some level or another. Its decision-making under uncertainty is governed by reinforcement learning. And at the core of reinforcement learning is the credit assignment problem. If I'm at a certain point in time and I'm given two possible actions I could take, I want to take the action that maximizes not just my short-term return, my short-term benefit or expected reward, but also balance it with longer-term implications. And I think that's at the core of intelligence, and it's something that reinforcement learning uniquely, as a machine learning discipline, uniquely tries to solve. So let's assume that's the case, okay? I wish I could think of another way to build AGI systems that would somehow be more safe, friendly, and effective, but you know, inspired by nature, and the only way I personally can think of things is actually in a way that adheres to this framework, reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is based on the notion of rewards, as you've heard a lot. There was a discussion here at the panel, so I'm happy that took place because I don't need to repeat the whole story here. But essentially, you're never maximizing in real life. You know, the reward is not a scalar. You know, it's a vector if you want to imagine it that way. Reward implies not just external rewards. Am I hungry or not? Am I cold or am I warm? But it also involves intrinsic cognitive processes that inject internal rewards that drive our learning and behavioral processes. For example, and Jürgen talks a lot about that, we do work on related topics, curiosity, boredom. When I'm bored in something, I tend to take actions to try to explore other areas of the state space. Or if unfolding of events occurs according to expectations, there's growing evidence that injects these internal rewards that were very much drive our actions. So just want to clarify the notion of rewards not being the scalar of whether I got to the cheese or not. It's way beyond that. But inevitably, if you subscribe to that view, agents try to maximize the reward prospect or expected reward in one form or another. Setting aside the mathematics behind that, that's kind of the intuition. And the question is, if that's true, and I personally think that as a system becomes more intelligent, the internal rewards dominate the incentive processes and not the external rewards. But if it's true, how can we avoid the inevitable sort of adversarial AGI, the Terminator AGI scenario? I mean, if that's what it comes down to. And I don't have a solution to that. I've been spending a lot of time, I've had many discussions, and there is a sort of trivial solution to say, well, you're going to build a system where you're going to limit its resources. A dog or a 4-year-old child will never be Einstein, okay, because of certain limitations of, objective limitations of resources such as storage elements, computational capability, and that's probably true, and that might hold. I also don't believe that a system like in the movies can be, turn super intelligent within an hour. That doesn't happen. Those of you that have done work in this area know that it's unrealistic. So I'm not so concerned about that, but it does open, a loophole that somebody, if the concepts are made, if AGI can be built by anyone, somebody is going to abuse it and build systems that are not as limited because they will think that has some benefit. And of course, again, you go back to the Terminator scenario. So I think it's a short-term solution. I don't have a long-term solution. For various reasons, a longer discussion, but I don't think engineering the rewards in a human beneficial way is somehow a long-term solution. I also think that's temporal, particularly in a nutshell, is because if the system becomes truly intelligent to a human level, maybe even beyond, it's going to be able to bypass that, okay? There's no way you can, definitely not through external means, that I can think of, you can actually, constrain the system to always be friendly and never sort of try to be adversarial or harmful to us in any way. So the big question is, first of all, if you're not limiting resources and you're just unbound, does surpassing human level intelligence means inevitably that the end of humanity is near, and maybe we're not the end of the evolution process, and maybe evolution should continue on different fabrics than biochemistry, and that could be it. We get this little selfish view that maintaining humanity and its freedom is the ultimate goal of the universe, but it may not be. And related to that, if that's not true, are there alternative frameworks to that of a reinforcement learning based agents that would put us on the path of AGI and somehow promise that everything scales, you can have efficiency, intelligence, everything that we attribute to human level intelligent systems, yet not, or somehow avoid the adversarial scenario. And that's about it in about 9 minutes, so thank you. Well, actually, I got 3 minutes. I'll take any questions. How's that? Okay. Yeah. You started late, but that's good.
My question is,
rewards, programming rewards. Okay.
I might as well get the next presentation.
So I'm not sure what the question was, but you know, there's a difference between goal and rewards, right? So the goal, if you want, the objective of a reinforcement learning agent is to maximize actually the utility, or what's called the value function in the reinforcement learning community, which is actually not the reward, the instantaneous reward, but some reward prospect, you know, some horizon of rewards in some form or another. And, you know, that's what drives its action selection process. So if you stray away from that, then you're not really talking about the standard reinforcement learning. And again, if there's a way around that would still yield intelligent machines, I'm interested to hear. But if not, then I think you're back to a realistic problem that as a system becomes super intelligent enough, it might be able to, you know, if I didn't have to worry about being too cold or too warm, and I'd have a system that maintains the optimal sort of temperature, that would change my actions because I wouldn't be concerned about being overdressed or underdressed, etc. And so that's a simple analogy, but I think it goes to emphasize where that might lead to, I think. Is there another minute for another question? Or?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, this presentation was actually intended to be given by one of my PhD students, but unfortunately he didn't get a visa for entering the United States, and therefore I had to jump in here. Now, I want to talk about knowledge, massive availability of knowledge. So here are some ideas of this presentation. So a potential next milestone of AGI could be based on massively knowledge-intensive systems from heterogeneous knowledge bases. In a certain sense, that is already, in a certain sense, the case. You collect knowledge from various sources, and usually the World Wide Web is a good possibility to find these things. An intelligent combination of ontological knowledge, for example, of knowledge about general rules, advanced reasoning techniques, learned and acquired knowledge, and so on, may be a possibility to create something that becomes relatively smart, actually, and can draw inferences that are highly non-trivial. Test cases can be systems that integrate knowledge from rather different sources and draw non-trivial conclusions. And I think that based on such things, ethical questions can be drawn. And the major focus here in this presentation will be that not only knowledge that is somehow available in the internet and knowledge bases, databases and so on should play a role, but also, for example, now this tremendous mass concerning visual information, streams, videos, pictures, and so on, that are up to now not really knowledge. They are just videos. They are more or less unlabeled pictures. But computer vision techniques allow already today, but in the future more intensively, to draw a lot of knowledge from these visual information. Here's a slide about knowledge sources. It's just mentioned that whereas classical media like newspapers, magazines, radio, television, and so on decreases significantly during the last years concerning usage, new media like laptops and mobile phones and mobile devices increases dramatically. That it is in principle possible to integrate enormous amounts of knowledge is in a certain sense already proven by something like the IBM Watson machine that won against the best human Jeopardy players, or there are other projects that attempt to make the web smarter by introducing to the World Wide Web semantic content, like in the LARC project, the Large Knowledge Collider, which is a European-funded collaborative project that enriches logic-based semantic web reasoning methods and employs cognitively inspired approaches and techniques and builds on distributed reasoning platforms. Now, what about the integration of these types of data? So for a next milestone of AGI, it could be possible to think about classical web-based resources, semantically enriched, for example, and classical ontological background information that may be given in form of domain ontologies and these things. But an important point may be in the future that multimodal information, in particular given as visual information, will play a more important role. This may be, and the training of systems in order to label what is depicted on pictures or what is depicted in video streams, this may be somehow guided by the community that is training such a flexible system in order to extract knowledge from this information that is given. And this may lead to new types of information. Clearly, in such an AGI system, you have different modules and you need different types to represent knowledge. So, for example, you need some device probably to code conceptual knowledge, for example, in forms of description logics and tableau-based reasoners. Or you have knowledge about general rules that may be perhaps a kind of a first-order logic approach plus a classical theorem prover. You may have knowledge about visual facts. This may be based on certain labeling techniques, automatically or semi-automatically learning certain classes and certain and labeling certain information depicted on pictures. Then a lot of things that play a role in concerning video streams and pictures is, for example, contextual information. This is something that may be also somehow guided and somehow supported by the community that is producing such types of information via their mobile devices, for example, or certain webcams, and so on and so on. Now, what can be gained by doing something like this? Here's a simple example, and this is a completely trivial example, and it's an example that is already more or less possible now. Imagine a webcam that is placed to observe a university campus, for example. Okay, so you see, for example, one particular side of a building and a parking lot, something like this. And then you can, for example, scan whether office windows are open, whether you are currently working in your office, etc., and how many cars are somehow located on the parking lots, and so on and so on. Now, the system maybe have possibilities to consult some other resources. So, for example, together with intelligent integration with other sources of information, such a system can draw intelligent conclusions from that. So, for example, it could ask you to close the window if you leave your office, and it consults the weather forecasts, the online weather forecasts, and knows that a thunderstorm is arriving. And in order to prevent that your office will be flooded, it just asks you, well, please close your window. Another possibility would be, for example, if it's scanning the parking lot and it learned how your car looks like, and there's another car that is towing your car away, then it may be inform you, well, okay, your car is somehow removed. You probably placed it on the wrong area on the parking area. Or you could, such a system could, for example, know how many hours you are working in your office and how many hours you are somehow not in your office. Things like that. I think such things are completely unproblematic and a real support system. Now, such a system could perhaps do some other things if if there are several webcams that are, for example, scanning somehow the environment. So, for example, such a system, by integrating knowledge could potentially detect which physicians you meet and how often, and infer what types of illnesses you have, for example. So that's a trivial inference, but only such a system has the possibility to do that in a certain sense, because it just recognizes when you arrive, it realizes that you go in, it realizes that you are doing something with the doctor and goes out, for example. It could be able to build a profile when, how often, how long, etc. you are in a bar and you're having some beers, for example. I don't know whether something like this is really something that should be somehow public knowledge. And it could be able, for example, to know when and where you meet this woman again, for example, which is also something that is a very private thing probably. And if it's an AGI system, can draw inferences from things like that and inform your wife, for example, then this is probably not something that is completely unproblematic. So I think that such a knowledge-intensive system that has such abilities pose some ethical questions, and some is not completely ethically unproblematic. Here are some of these ethical questions. So if you couple classical types of knowledge that are freely available in the web, for example, or in certain communities in the web, if you can couple this with new types of knowledge, so for example, from video streams, from mobile devices, from webcams, you can put everywhere, and so on, then some ethical questions can arise. So, for example, to which extent should it be allowed to compute profiles of people without any legal basis? In this sense, we have just, well, an open community, and there's no legal basis to collect such information. Which types of information can freely be connected and coupled, and which types of information should be kept isolated? Okay, from each other. So, what possibilities to connect these different knowledge bases should be allowed? When does an AGI become an uncontrolled autonomous control system? So, for example, if you really think now that this is not only a knowledge collecting device, but it's also proactive, can disseminate, for example, what it knows in such an AGI system, then it's somehow an autonomous system that has a relatively strong control about many things, but it's itself somehow not controlled. Who should be allowed to view consequences such an AGI system can draw? So in principle, first of all, it can draw every consequence from the sources of information it can gain. But at a certain point, probably the question is, are there some limitations that should be somehow imposed here? Okay, there are some ethical questions that are, I think, very naturally falling from this such an AGI system that is already more or less possible, yeah, we can postpone discussion to the later time point. Thank you very much.
All right. I'm incredibly honored to be permitted to speak to you today because I'm kind of the odd man out here. I'm not an academic. I'm not a researcher. I'm a web developer. Compared to you guys at my company, we play in a sandbox. We watch you building skyscrapers, and I just noticed you had a really cool truck I had to come check out. So that's why I'm here. But the framework that we work with for building web applications is an open source framework. And I've seen a lot of parallels between the framework that we work with, which is Drupal, and what's being done with OpenCog and even architecturally with other systems in the AGI frameworks. And so I want to talk about some of those things and maximizing the power of open source for AGI. My hope is that every one of you who's working on a software project would consider open sourcing your work so that hackers like me can throw in a weekend here and there and help out. And I hope to give you some tips that if you do that, that will help you maximize the opportunities that affords. So as I said, we work with Drupal. I've made some very small core contributions to Drupal. I'm also a member of the Drupal security team. Drupal is what we call a content management framework. Out of the box, it's a content management system that you can do simple content websites without writing a single line of code. You could build systems like any of these that I've listed here, mostly without writing code, click together websites, but but it also has a robust framework to it so that developers can do anything else you can imagine with the Drupal system for bringing communities together online to interact with each other, to share content, to collaboratively work on developing content. So here's a bunch of organizations that use Drupal. Of course, Mozilla Foundation and the White House, but Metallica and the Playboy Bunny there's for Playboy DE, the German website, which I only go there for the articles and for the web framework. So, the question is, how can we make AGI that sexy and get people interested in working on AGI frameworks as a hobby? I have a 2-minute video from Dries Boytaert, the founder of Drupal. I'm going to show that at the end if I have time. So why should you use open source? Well, I think the audience is ready. I mean, for one, people who grew up when the Terminator movies came out are now approaching their 30s, and they think this stuff is cool. They've finished university, they've hopefully got a stable income, so they can do crazy hobbies that might be related to your fields that you're working in. There are 134,000 and more free apps in the Android market. These are things that aren't necessarily monetized that are available. That's as of April, when the number of free apps in the Android market surpassed the App Store. There are 14,000 plus LEGO Mindstorm projects on the LEGO Mindstorm community site submitted by users just to put out there and share. And these are people, building with this toy robot, right? Well, what good is that to you guys working on a higher level AGI? Well, I'll tell you, I did the LIDA tutorial yesterday, the LIDA tutorial. Everything we did in there, if you wanted to embody that, you could do it on a NXT robot. It's got 5 sensors and 3 actuators, prove to me how many more than that you need if you think there's some specific number. There's been a lot of talk of virtual worlds. Minecraft has 3,000 user-submitted mods that people made as a hobby in their spare time. These mods for this virtual world, they share on the forum and give to other people for free, and other people hack on them and release better versions, and they share them back and forth. So I think there's an audience out there of people who are interested in all these things that are on the peripherals of what are needed for AGI, both robotics and image sensing and language processing and virtual worlds that could be useful to you guys. So how would you like to harness 0.1% of those 134,000 mobile app developers who are already doing stuff for free? Maybe they'd donate a weekend to your project. I also think open source is important because it's safer. I added this slide when I saw that pretty much everybody else in this section is talking about the safety of AGI. I think the best defense against unfriendly or unsafe AGI is safe AGI. And what we need to avoid ultimately isn't necessarily just unsafe AGI itself, but unsafe AGI with no defenses against it, right? Some people like Hugo de Guerra say we're going to get unfriendly anyway, so we need to have the friendly AGI on our side. Remember, in Terminator 1, the robots were the bad guys. In Terminator 2, he was the good guy, so you can get Arnold Schwarzenegger on your side, right? So, the worst case scenario, if AGI is developed in a closed source model, we've got very few people who are going to have the capabilities to fight back against that AGI. In an open source scenario, yeah, you might make it a little bit easier for someone to create an unsafe AGI, but we're going to have a lot of people with the capabilities to defend against that, to build AGI that can combat that. So is unfriendly AGI actually less likely to occur in a closed model? Well, I think the burden of proof is on you if you say that it is. Another important part of using open source is it's training the next generation. The people that carry the ball forward may not be the students in your university. How many people go through a university program and then change careers completely? So the people you're investing in that setting may not be around to carry the ball. In the Drupal community, the project lead for the most recent release, Drupal 7, it was the largest release of Drupal yet, was a girl who goes by the name WebChick online, and she started out in the Drupal community just hanging out in the forums, building a click-together website, did a little bit of coding, learned how to create a Drupal module for a simple quiz function, and blossomed into an incredible web developer who ended up taking the lead for an entire release cycle, which is a very major project for Drupal. For myself, I actually started out working for a nonprofit, not as a web developer, but they happened to need a new website, and I discovered Drupal and it would meet their needs. And from that, I actually left my job there. They became my first client, and I started freelancing in Drupal. And through a similar process, have gotten more and more involved without any formal training or connection to the origins of the Drupal project. So given that, if you can see the value in open sourcing your project, how do you make all these hobbyist contributors, this crowdsourcing capabilities, how do you make them able to create meaningful contributions to your project? First, I think there's an important part of branding and messaging. Don't just call your project AGI soft. Don't make it about the software. You've got to continually emphasize that you're building a community of people with common interests. Drupal got its name from the Dutch word for village, emphasizing the image of a community. When Dries Boytaert, the founder, went to create his first site where he was going to deploy Drupal, he intended to register the Dutch word for village, which is dorp, and he mistyped it as drop, D-R-O-P, it's D-O-R-P. And of course, the Dutch word, that's the English word, drop, the Dutch word is Drupal. That's how Drupal got its name. So the idea of community is built into the core of Drupal, and it's a message that's repeated over and over as you read the documentation that Drupal is an amazing software project, but it's an amazing software project because it's an amazing community of people who have common interests in making the web more accessible to everyone. And another way, to foster community is through unconferences, bar camps, BOFs are something that have been really important in the Drupal community. Even when we have formal get-togethers, it's birds of a feather session and a side track along from the formal presentations. You have a bunch of rooms that are available where anybody can write up on a whiteboard. We're going to do a talk about this there. Very informal, and now when I go to Drupal events, those are the things I go to. I skip the main sessions because that's where the real action is. So you need to reduce the barriers to entry if you want people to be active and productive in your open source project. So you want to have really high quality examples. One of the Drupal modules, really the only Drupal module that is not a part of the Drupal core when you download Drupal, that is developed alongside of core by the same people, is a module called examples. And it's just full of examples of how to implement the hooks and the tools that Drupal provides to developers. You need to reach for the technological lowest common denominator that can accomplish your goal. So in AGI, that might mean using something like Python instead of Haskell or something more obscure. In Drupal, it is surprisingly to many people, it's historically been more of a procedural PHP system as opposed to object-oriented. That's not just as a goal for lowest common denominator. It's in part because PHP 4 didn't have very good object orientation support, and PHP 5 adoption was very slow among hosting providers. But it had an interesting side effect in that I observed that people with a computer science background, of course, object-oriented makes perfect sense to them. They want to do object-oriented PHP. But people coming from a design background, the people who are doing HTML and CSS, they get procedural much easier. And so that was kind of a side effect of other factors that drove them to the procedural PHP, which now looking back, some people say, well, we should move everything to OOP as fast as we can now that PHP supports it better. But maybe there are reasons not to, because it allows a broader base of people to contribute who have lesser skill sets in that area. You have to support all of the tools. So your source code management system, Drupal's done a great job originally with CVS and now migrating to Git. And that process of migrating to Git was a huge community effort of making sure that the documentation was available and making sure that people understood how they could make their contributions available to the community. And so along with that, along with everything else, you got to be available. So the OpenCog project has an IRC room that's fairly active, and being available for real-time communication I think is really important. And as project leaders, those of you who are heading up software projects, I think it's important to recognize that your most important people are your best mentors. They may not be your best coders, because your best mentors are going to be bringing up your next coders. 1 minute? All right. And this might be the most important point, so I'll make this and then I'm done. You've got to make it easy for people to find and share contributions. So it's one thing to put your code out there for anybody to look at, but you've got to make it easy for them, whatever work they do, to give it back so that other people can find their work and get it back and get that self-reinforcing system. So, of course, it requires being modular and thinking like a framework, even if you're not exactly a framework. It's important to have very high standards for your core. But then for your contributions, you have very low standards. So open up a repository, set up a network on GitHub, or set up your own, file repository where anybody who wants to, or anybody who meets very basic minimums, can upload stuff in there so that it's easy to get to and people know where to find it. And you have that one centralized authoritative repository so no one gets confused about how to find help. So that's what I've got. Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, so mine is the last talk in this series, and then we'll move to the panel discussion quickly after that. Following in the vein of the last talk, I'm going to talk about open source AGI. My theme is not just to advocate open source, since that's already been done very well, but to deal with the question, well, isn't building open source AGI a kind of recipe for disaster, which is very often posed to me in the context of OpenCog. People say, well, of course, if you open source your AGI code, won't some psychopaths basically fork your code, use it to make an evil closed source fork of your open source project that will then blow everybody up or do something else nasty? And I mean, I think it's a more deep and subtle question than most people recognize. I mean, I don't think we don't aim to take a sort of Alfred E. Newman attitude of what me worry and just do it and not think about it at all. But I think that there are many pluses and minuses to the open source approach as opposed to the closed source approach. I mean, yeah, putting something out there for everyone is scary. On the other hand, elite groups who believe they know best for the whole human race and want to save everyone in secrecy according to their ideas have also caused a lot of damage in the history of the human race. And of course, each of you may think, yes, but my own elite group of me and my friends would never cause any harm, right? But then, I mean, that sincere line of thinking has caused a lot of problems as well. So I don't think open or closed is particularly a panacea. And then another high-level point, of course, is how closed is closed really, given that corporate espionage is everywhere and everything is online now. I mean, in principle, you could develop an AGI project in a sealed chamber inside someone's basement and keep all the prisoners there under lock and key with guns to their heads. Or did I say prisoners? I meant programmers. And I mean, you could do that, but in reality, that's not really the way it's likely to happen. Like if a big company develops an AGI as a closed project, someone else will hire away some programmers, someone will quit and start their own project with the same ideas. They can go to a country that doesn't care about IP laws. I mean, the alternatives aren't just open source versus lock in a vault in the basement. It's more a matter of how quickly the information gets diffused, where it gets diffused to, at what rate, and so forth. So Joel Pitt, who's one of the lead programmers on OpenCog and the head of our project in Hong Kong, he and I are in the midst of writing a paper, kind of going through strategies you could take, assuming you are doing open source AGI. What can you do to sort of make sure, not to make sure, but to bias the odds in your favor, to bias the odds in favor of a positive ethical outcome. And our paper gives argumentation underlying each of these. Now I'm just going to roll through each of these 9 points with brief commentary. So the first is kind of obvious. You want to engineer into the system the capability to acquire all sorts of different ethical knowledge. And we kind of, well, I guess we phrase that as we did because we don't think that much of like programming in ethical axioms or theories into the system. We think it's probably more valuable to teach the system to acquire judgment, empathy, habits of ethical behavior through its interaction in the world. And you want to provide ethical interaction and instruction to the system. And you want to build your system in a way that's easy to do, so that whoever forks the code or downloads the code, develops it, and uses it, it's easy for them to teach the system in an ethical way. I mean, in the context of building virtual worlds or robots or something, that means when you build the world that the AGI is naturally going to play in and that most people will use it in, you want to be sure there are avenues for ethical instruction in there, just as preschool teachers think about teaching ethical behavior to young children alongside teaching cognitive linguistic skills and so forth. This third one is more of a cognitive architecture point, which, as I mentioned in an earlier discussion, is a place where OpenCog diverges intentionally from human cognitive architecture. And we're trying to build OpenCog with this fairly stable hierarchical goal system where you can supply it with top-level goals. It will learn sub-goals from these, and it will systematically try to pursue its goals. Now, there's no absolute guarantee of it doing this. This is a real-world system interacting with an uncertain world and with limited resources. But it's still different from how the human brain works, where there is no stable hierarchical goal system and no kind of probabilistically trying to achieve your goals. That's something some of us acquire culturally, but it's not wired into the human brain in the way that you can do into an AI system. Getting to self-programming, as we discussed in the workshop this morning, I mean, I think the risk of kind of runaway, self-improving, self-reprogramming AGI is kind of overblown, and that I don't think that's a likely thing to happen with AGI systems in the real world. On the other hand, I do think it would be a bad and dangerous thing if it were to happen. I think that self-programming, self-modification at the deep levels, we want it to occur fairly slowly and with humans in the loop in the first phases. So I think that is a feature of following the path of human cognitive development, and I think it is a feature, not a bug. I don't necessarily think we should pursue an approach to AGI where the system is radically revising itself all the time right from the beginning. That's intrinsically unpredictable. So a more conceptual or controversial point, a number of thinkers, including, say, Francis Halligan at Free University of Brussels, have written about what they call the global brain, the emerging collective intelligence of all of us connected to the internet and our mobile phones and Google and narrow AI programs and eventually AGI programs. To the extent that early stage AGIs are linked into this whole emerging global information network, they're going to be tied in with us and kind of growing up together with human beings, which is sort of Ray Kurzweil's perspective on things. The alternative being the idea of an AGI in a box locked in a basement somewhere, evolving in its own direction, which is another risk of the isolated approach to AGI, because by and large, if someone's developing a system in a box in their basement for security purposes, probably that system is not engaging with the whole network of humanity in a rich way as it grows up. There's a lot of different perspectives on AGI and on the future of AGI and the human race. And one thing I think the futurist community has not been good at so far is really deeply communicating with people with divergent points of view, because it's so much easier and more fun to communicate with people who have about the same point of view as you do. And if somehow, as we went forward, there were a way to really engage in deep interactions with humans with a huge variety of views on all these issues we're talking about, I think that would certainly increase the odds of things going forward positively. I mean, I tried this on my trip to Mongolia recently to talk about friendly AI with these people who could barely speak English, living in a yurt in the middle of the desert, and it didn't make much progress. But it's a difficult thing, but it may be important as we move forward. Getting to a point that Steve Omohundro likes to talk about, creating a mutually supportive community of AGIs. Again, this is not a panacea, but it seems, based on what I understand about human intelligence and about game theory and social interaction, if, for starters, you had a bunch of somewhat different AGIs watching each other and interacting with each other, that would seem to provide some uncertain but interesting level of protection against some of them going nuts. And if you have a bunch of forks of your open source AGI all doing stuff in the world, then when someone introduces a new one, there's other AGIs to watch it and interact with it, which is better than just having humans doing so. There's a lot of interesting presentations given today about AGI ethics, and I think it's valuable to be thinking about it now. I also think most of our ideas about AGI ethics now are going to seem idiotic 10 or 20 years from now, once we have more experience building AGI systems. So I think that, as in many other areas, the theory and the practice are going to have to advance together. So we'll have to advance our ethical understanding as we understand what these AGI systems can actually do, rather than what we speculate them to do. And perhaps my most controversial point is saved for the last. After a bunch of thinking, we came to the conclusion probably it's safer to develop AGI sooner rather than later. And in the next 45 seconds, I can't justify this too deeply, but my basic line of thinking is there's other technologies developing too. And think about molecular nanotechnology as one example. Now, if you had a whole economic infrastructure with advanced synthetic biology, molecular nanotech, all this other cool stuff where any one of us could just synthesize any configuration of matter by typing something into the internet. If you brought an AGI that was powerful into the world in that circumstance, if it was bad, it could wreak a lot of havoc really quickly. Whereas if you brought a very powerful AGI into the world now, if it wanted to wreak havoc, to get new hardware for itself. It still has to order it online. It has to get someone to build it, get a truck to drive it there. I mean, the process is much slower, and there's a lot of humans in the loop. I mean, of course, if it was a superhuman God mind, you could circumvent all that. But in a lot of realistic scenarios, the more advanced the rest of the technological infrastructure is, the more rapid it would be for an AGI that went awry to do a lot of damage. So you come to the conclusion that if AGI developed sooner relative to other advanced technologies, the risk of a really catastrophic damage coming out of it might actually be lower. And this assumes a somewhat measured advancement of AGI. It assumes you're not in the scenario where, like, this minute we have the open cognitive today, and next minute we have a God mind. So that we're writing a paper on this. I'd hoped to have it ready for this conference, but it didn't quite happen. But we'll post it online within the next month or so. And just to recap the theme, these are things we think you could do to bias open source AGI toward friendliness. I don't think there's any guarantee with an open source or a closed source or any approach, basically. And I think the merits and demerits of the open source approach will become clear as things develop along with a lot of other things. So we can, that's the last talk in this first fraction of the future of AGI session. So we're not scheduled for a half hour of panel discussion, then a break, then more future of AGI afterwards. So all the speakers who just talked should come sit up here in a row. Any questions? Joshua will moderate.
Yes, please.
I have a question to Mark. You said that cooperation is an instrumental goal regardless of power difference. That was certainly very surprising to me because so my question is how am I supposed to reconcile this with the evidence that seems to be seen that we do not cooperate with species that are on lesser intelligence level than us unless we care about them. So
part of it is that we do treat them well.
Do we have microphones up there? Oh. But they're not attached to anything. Hello? Hello?
Totally attached.
Cool.
Part of the answer was contained in your question. We do treat animals well when we care about them. It's much more our short-sighted intellectual side that sees, the immediate gain that we might get from treating them poorly, ignoring them, taking advantage of them. And it's very much our hard-coded, emotionally optimized emotions that really say, the correct long-term thing to do that you've evolved to know is that in the long run, treating the animals well ends up being to your benefit far more often than not. It's the same thing as the rainforests. Ooh, look, we can make tons of money by, tearing down the rainforests. In the long run, we all pay a price for it. There are all sorts of examples where the short-sighted, clear advantage, it turns out to be really the long-term stupid thing. And a lot of the problem is that, we have semi-developed intellects right now. We're intelligent to a certain degree. The more intelligent you are, the more time discounting is not in effect. And, all of our problems in life are because we take the short, easy way out. We see the obvious killer, application, and we don't realize that, if you treat animals poorly, anyone who doesn't know you, who sees you treating animals poorly, is never going to trust you because they then know how you treat those who are in a lesser position. Now, it's very possible if there's, one and only one AGI, they never want to reproduce, They're sure that they'll never be in a submissive position, if they're willing to take on the entire world, and that includes, what's the probability that there's other sentient life in the universe? Do you want to take that risk? I mean, I love the risk-averse approach because, most of these, short-term, I can win things are really stupid in the long term. And if you're risk-averse, hopefully you're looking and seeing that.
We have one more question.
I'd like to talk about what I see as a practical thing as opposed to a theoretical thing. Here's my theory of how this plays out in the next 5 or 10 years. I think it's going to come through robotics, actually. We at the moment, we've already got unmanned aircraft vehicles, which are being used for remote assassinations in other countries. I think currently it's one person, one vehicle. Real soon it's going to be one person, 10 vehicles. And the autonomous capability of driving these is pretty much just around the corner, maybe 5 years out tops. After that, you take that out into giving them semi-intelligent, more intelligent, eventually AGI, maybe in 15, 20 years or so. But this is a very real extrapolation. And I'm looking at this, especially with the economy being the way it is. What's the question? Okay, the question is, when we have killer robots that are going around killing people, your killer app reminds me, how can we transition that into safe robots and safe AGIs?
So the question was, the major questions are going to be posed by the threat of military applications of robotics. How are we going to control that?
Yes.
The question was actually transition. And Ron Arkin from the University of Georgia does a lot of work on robot ethics in warfare. And basically, the answer really is that the individual or machine doing the killing needs to be under the control of a machine or human being not doing the killing. I mean, when we have humans out in the field, the first thing they do is they send you to boot camp, they break you down, they reprogram you as a killer, but they keep you in this enforced hierarchical control architecture whereby theoretically, you shouldn't be able to break loose, you should be following the rules of warfare. It doesn't work all the time, but that's sort of the concept. And that's, a lot of what he's proposing for the military robots is that, they are limited in terms of how much they can progress. They're integrated into this, architecture. They're not allowed to actually, both kill and be in charge of their own ethics.
Oh, thanks for the reference to Arkins. Do you want to add something? Does it work?
It sure does. One point I might add in there is that so novel systems are going to be developed in a research context before they're deployed, and so and usually there's a fair lag between the two. So if I was going to look at that, I might consider more the expansion of military robotics as something at the margin creating more demand for machine learning and AI work.
Yeah, one brief comment on this is that, from having done a little bit of work in that sector, as I know Mark and maybe others have as well, at a premium in creating military systems is that systems will behave according to doctrine and they'll do what they're told. And this isn't always compatible with creating systems with the maximum level of creative intelligence. So I would find it unlikely that military robots are going to be the most intelligent AGI systems at any point in time, just because flexible creative intelligence is not demanded by that application as much as by some others. So the answers may be that by the time you have those smart killer robots, if you do, there will be other even smarter AGIs out there that will change the landscape a bit.
now, since military funding seems to be the main source of AGI research, especially in the US, does everybody else feel the same or share your optimism?
I have a thought.
Yep.
Today's weapons are extremely crude, and the whole killing people and blowing things up, we only do that because we can't exert force in a more humane way. And so I think as technology advances, the whole nature of warfare is going to change dramatically, and we can create an infrastructure which actually obeys, protocols and kind of universal constitution. I think that's something that a lot of people would like. So human rights can be embedded into the infrastructure in general, and the whole thing of killing people doesn't have to be a part of that.
Yeah, certainly what the U.S. military is uniquely good at now is not killing large numbers of people, but targeting exactly who they want to kill. So it's more intelligence and precision rather than more carnage.
That's ridiculous. How can you even say such a thing and pretend it's not controversial?
I'm not pretending it's not controversial.
Well, we do have a board of utopians here. Maybe you would want to expand on that.
Well, I want to say a related thing, which is I'm very skeptical. Or so forth. If we try to control what they're allowed to have, and it could be much safer and much more realistic if we imagine we're in a setting where everything that can be done is going to be done by someone. And so, I don't know, every time we see that aloud, I just don't believe it. And I think it just makes me nervous. So we should be, I like the open source idea because everyone will be doing lots of different things. We have to have goals that are compatible with that and that lead towards benevolence or safetyness or good outcomes.
Good, another question there?
So I think my question is mostly for Stephen, but could be for anyone. So presumably an AGI will be able to organically develop concepts of justice and fairness and this kind of thing. And if you have some external system of software that's imposing all of these restrictions, putting it in jail, how are you going to convince this thing that these restrictions are good for it? Because if you can't convince it of that, it will just sit there and pout. I mean, that's what any sufficiently intelligent being would do.
So there's a whole sequence of things that are happening. So what I was talking about is mostly the very near term. How can we ensure the program you write tomorrow doesn't run out of control? And so building in provable constraints on it sort of is good for that. I think what you're talking about is as systems get more developed, we really want them to want to behave in an ethical way. We want them to be friendly. We want them to create cooperative environments, just like people do. We love cooperating most of the time. And so, from that perspective, the system doesn't want to break out of its own utility function. That's what it wants to do. And so if we, choose that carefully so that it is aligned with human values, then it wants to be aligned with our values. But I think that's a little dangerous.
Is for an AGI that's sort of alive before it develops those advanced concepts of justice and fairness.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if we could really understand it. It'd be great to make the very first systems have those. The trouble is, as we've heard, there are a lot of philosophical subtleties, and so I don't think we can rely on giving it, values that we think will lead to the right outcome to ensure safety initially. And so that's why I've been focusing on systems which are mathematically provably limited in what they can do. And then eventually I think that can be used to bootstrap the systems which actually want to behave in the way that we want it.
I think we need to cut it a little bit short. We have a lot of questions from the audience. Maybe I take a couple questions first before we continue. You were the next one.
Okay. So one of the things that tends to keep us in check, at least temporarily, even if it's not a matter of constraining our power, in fact that we're not, super intelligent, is the fact that there are a whole bunch of us, and if we do something bad, then we generally have repercussions from a group of other people around us. So, what do you guys think of the idea of, and I know this isn't a solution for everything, especially isn't for other species on the planet, but having a whole ton of AGI that are completely different?
Who wants to take this? Let's take Itamar, because
I couldn't agree more. I think the fact that there are implications to our actions that we're limited and repercussions are the key. So if you or anyone in here would suddenly be Superman and not vulnerable, and can take on the whole world if he or she wanted to, I think it would vastly change their behavior. Maybe not at first if they've started out as a moral human, but eventually. That's really the concern, and sort of the long, a system that's intelligent enough would be dangerous in that sense. Now, having a bunch of those kind of fight each other, well, then my question would be, where's humanity in that equation? Maybe they'll just wipe us all out and then deal with themselves. And that's, if they are on an equal platform eventually at some level that's way beyond human level, then they may end up with the same predicament. But I think the concern you raise is the concern that I have about superintelligence and the inevitably or the conflict that might arise from that inevitably.
Next question.
I have a question or a point to consider. So if you were to anthropomorphize evolution and just look at all of the atrocities it did in order to create us, basically doing a parameter search over conscious beings and doing whatever horrible things they needed to do in order to create happy ones and killing them off kind of indiscriminately when it didn't work out, you definitely say that it was a bad person and it did really bad things. And I think that as humans we want to avoid ever doing that. And so I think that creating an AGI from scratch might be morally wrong, but a lot of people seem to think that we're going to be doing that really soon. So I like the whole brain emulation and also just the kind of personal or self-modification perspective, because you can do things to yourself. That's probably not morally wrong. If you have free will, you can do that. So I kind of wonder what you think about that perspective. Will we actually create AGIs from scratch, or is this going to be a roadblock?
So this was basically not a simple question, but a bunch of topics which you addressed. Do you remember the question, or should I summarize it? Or basically you expressed lingering doubt that evolution would be perceived as a good thing. Yeah, and then we could create an AGI from scratch. And you expressed sympathy for the whole brain emulation approach. Yeah, and self-modification.
And I also think we should hear Steve's answer to the previous question, because he's written a lot about that, about the social groups.
Yes, you are right. Okay, but let's start maybe. Do you want to take this, since it's in your area?
I was just going to say that while I'm sympathetic to your point about evolution not being very humane, it's not at all clear that whole brain emulation is a better approach, since if you have a partial brain scan and you're trying to realize it, the more obvious ways to do this involve creating numbers of people that have never existed before, each of which lives for some seconds while you try and see if that works, and many of which are in brain damaged states.
Yeah, so it seems like in any situation where you're searching over a large number of parameters trying to improve a model of brains, you're going to get that sort of situation. And the numbers might be small relative to the long-term population, but so there's a possibility that if we had a version of the animal rights movement or something calling for extension of moral status to such system, that would restrict advancement in some areas, but it would seem quite a leap to imagine that everywhere stopping research into such a valuable technology when people don't seem to be complaining about the treatment of systems that use reinforcement learning algorithms today, even though you can make an analogy to very simple organisms and goal-directed behavior.
So back to the question of whether creating a kind of ecosystem with powerful AIs and humans is preferable to having a single sort of system that controls it. It's certainly my predilections definitely go in that direction. And when you look at some of the game theory literature, you can create a setup. I mean, the image I have is that we'll have a kind of universal constitution that reflects the values we care most about, that we'll have these very powerful systems that are so powerful that no person could limit them. So the only thing that can limit one of these systems is another one of those systems. And so if you only have one or two, well, then they could collude and do something. If you have lots of them and you structure it so that if anybody stops obeying the constitution, that their neighbors detect that and keep it in check, that feels a lot more stable to me. And I've done a number of mathematical analyses. If you have computationally limited systems, there's a very nice result of Neyman that the iterated prisoner's dilemma, you can actually find cooperative solutions. And so a similar kind of thing, I think, happens in these systems. If they're not too big, that within a range of powers, if they were to get into conflict, it would be so costly for both of them that there's actually a benefit, just in a pure economic calculation, to creating a peaceful solution. And if you get a lot of them creating all in that sort of interaction, I believe you can create an ecosystem in which even a rogue individual or some percentage of rogue individuals would not be able to take it over. Probably you have to limit the maximum size of any entity. It's probably a good idea to do that today too. Whenever corporations hit a certain size, you cut them in two. I don't know how popular that would be, but
what about the comprehensibility problem? If one agent becomes more and more capable in a way that the others can't understand because it's just different than them.
That's a really good question. You might have requirements to explain, your motivations or something like that.
Forced conformity. You have to be comprehensible to the other agents, so they know you don't become too weird because you might be becoming super powerful, but they don't understand.
So that balance between freedom to explore wherever and enough constraint so that nobody can sort of run amok. That's a challenge. Yeah.
So you just mentioned the point that you want to have multiple entities competing. That's why you want to limit their size.
Cooperating.
Yeah. You want to limit their size so one doesn't take over. And this appeals to a position where you have conflict between those entities. And we find that if we look at humankind, where you have large-scale organizations which are intelligent on their own, that they are competing too. And in this competition, not the most benevolent have been the most successful ones. Stalin was arguably very successful, and Dick Cheney was very successful. And even though modern-day democracies are kept in check by WikiLeaks and so on, sorry if somebody listens from some agency, but how is it possible that you all do not need to reflect on the problems of conflict, of violent conflict between entities which compete for resources?
First, if anybody hasn't seen it, the movie The Corporation is quite interesting. Corporations are profit-maximizing entities by definition in the United States, and many of them behave in psychopathic manner. And this movie sort of analyzes corporations as if they were people. What psychological type would they be? And they're psychopaths, a lot of them. On the other hand, there are checks and balances, rules that kept trying to keep them in check. In some sense, I think the corporation is a model for the AI. Like what we're doing to keep corporations sort of behaving in positive human ways is exactly the same issues as we'll have with the AIs. Mm-hmm. There's a new kind of corporation which is sort of halfway between a non-profit and a for-profit that some people are proposing, which they're allowed to include more than just the profit motive. Mm-hmm. The other piece you mentioned was, what was the second half? It was...
problem of conflict.
Oh, conflict. Yeah. So economists have a notion of co-opetition, which is a simultaneous competition for resources, but also there's mutual gains of benefit, synergies from working together. And I think when you have the economy, when you look at it, yes, there's a lot of competition, but even apparent competitors, AMD and Intel, both want to expand the market for the Intel, for the i86 architecture. And so there are subtle, balances of cooperation and competition that sort of lead things. And yeah.
Okay, you were the next one.
So this is a comment about the rationality. You said AI and people actually are rational in very specific ways. But Herb Simon put it in very elegant ways that it is bounded rationality. In particular, the rationality is subjective. You can't tell somebody that they're rational given the strength that they work under. It might seem eminently it would be. It has to be rational. It's just that they have different constraints for him, whether it's in terms of knowledge or in terms of time or in terms of process. So, so it's a comment that it's instead of considering people as irrational, they should be considered as bounded rational beings.
So using the notion of bounded rationality, you have pointed out that rationality itself is a neutral tool, that rationality does not have explicit goals, but can be used to go to goals?
No, people are, I mean, whatever they do, it's irrational. It's
Okay.
just that, you may think that given the knowledge you have, you may not do the same thing. That does not make it irrational.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that whatever you do is rational.
Okay, what is the question?
No, there's a comment. That
Yeah, okay.
It should be considered that way instead of calling something
Yep.
rational.
I think that the game theory results that Steve was alluding to do make use of the notion of bounded rationality.
Yeah. That's true. You with the next one.
Yes. So Mark quoted Eliezer as saying that the problem of fully defining friendliness is basically solvable without already having a friendly AI. And I would like to ask if anyone on the panel actually believes that debate argument for it. I've never heard
Argument for for initial friendly AI? Or?
fully defining what friendly AI means a friendly AI is a claim I have heard, quoted from Eliezer indirectly from Eliezer as well. Does anyone believe that? And if so, can you argue for it? I don't know why that's even true.
I mean, fully defining anything in a declarative way is pretty tricky. This is a classic AI problem from AI 101. Like, how do you define what's a cup versus a bowl explicitly? So to the extent that friendliness to humans is a sort of informal, natural language, folk psychology concept, I wouldn't expect us to be able to fully define it in a precise way. I'm not sure it's the kind of thing that you can fully define. I think that friendly AI, it's a notion that's going to evolve as AIs and humanity evolve sort of tacitly in the same way that everyday ethics and common sense morality have evolved.
What's Mark? Itamar?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to come. I have problems understanding the whole notion of friendly AI. I mean, one way to interpret it is the agent or the system doesn't take actions and intentionally harm humans, right? But that's a very, for me, very abstract. Right, that's very abstract, right? So, I mean, I'm sorry? Right. But it goes, again, into, in my mind, an attempt to interpret this is through its goals. And again, if you subscribe to reinforcement learning, it's rewards, whether external or internal. But yeah, I have a problem with that, and I have a problem with enforcing it as these things become more intelligent. It's a self-referring problem.
And I guess my answer to Ben's question is, if you use it like a cup, it's a cup. I'm very much a functionalist. I mean, yeah, that bowl's a cup. Sure, your cupped hands are a cup. Anything you use like a cup, it's a cup. It's function that matters.
What's the definition of friendliness?
That's a good question.
That's the point.
From Yudkowsky, it's that the AGI will treat humanity in the way in which they want to be treated.
Or in the way in which they would want to be treated if they were the people that they want to be, or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people don't want to be pretty. Yeah. Some people don't want to be treated friendly, I guess.
Some people don't want to be the people they want to be.
Yeah.
I'm pretty dubious about a lot of these things that are going to protect us from the computers. It seems to me the most important thing that mankind can do to protect itself from computers is to make ourselves more intelligent so that we're more capable of dealing with problems. And therefore, I think there should be a lot of emphasis for using artificial intelligence to amplify collective intelligence. For the first decade or two, or maybe even 3, that these AGIs are on the scene, humans are still going to be the major string pullers in the world. And we have to realize we're dealing in a world where these computers will not only be used by academics, they'll be used by militaries, they'll be used by criminal organizations, they'll be used by hackers. Hacking is one place where you're going to be using the most wildest and craziest of algorithms to just get into other people's boxes and twiddle with their minds. So I think the thing we really need to do is make ourselves more enlightened through various forms of collective intelligence, including Ben's plugging into the global mind. So, I mean, what are your opinions on that?
I'll just say I'm all in favor of making humanity more intelligent. I just don't know how to do that. I'd be happy to hear other people.
Have you read about collective intelligence at all?
Yeah. I mean, again, there's a philosophical, theoretical aspect, and there's a practical one, and so I'd be very interested if anyone wants to comment on how to practically do that.
I mean, just one example is Wikipedia. I mean, no single person could have done Wikipedia. It's a creation of the whole planet, and lots of people now go there to learn about things, and so it's increased the intelligence of many people around the planet. It's, you know, it's not automated yet, but imagine a successor to the Wikipedia, which was really smart, and you have the beginnings of a true global mind in which it's sort of a synergy of people and an intelligent system.
Start wikifying politics.
Again?
Why can't we start wikifying politics?
Brilliant. We need it. I mean, some of the decisions that people make are so irrational, insane. It would be great if there were a sort of a system whereby people could make decisions and that the public opinion was really driven by what was true rather than, you know, what was convincing.
I can give you some references after the session where people have started doing that.
Yes, I'm aware of them.
Do you want to add a European perspective, Kai-Uwe?
My perspective on what?
On wikifying politics?
No, not really. Perhaps I can add something on this definition problem. As a matter of fact, in principle, every concept, every important concept that was now mentioned, rationality, bounded rationality, morality, ethical aspects of behavior, intelligence, for example, itself, right? Then, and all this kind of stuff, all these terms are just non-definable. And I never heard a good definition of what rationality is. I never heard a good definition of what intelligence is, and so on. What happens is, and that is what people essentially doing, they develop perhaps normative theories, reinforcement learning, and then if I maximize my utility function or my expected future future reward, then I call this rational, for example, or intelligent. Some logicians say everything I can prove, and therefore I behave according to my proofs and the things I can prove, that is rational. Or if I have the right heuristics, if I have a heuristic-based rationality concept, and I behave according to this nice heuristics, then this behavior is rational, and so on. And you can do this with all these things. So in principle, I think definitions of such concepts is in any case not possible. And the only thing we have, if we talk about machines that should behave